Section 25 of Tarzan the Terrible by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 25. Home. Within an hour of the fall of Lu Don and Mo Sar, the chiefs and principal warriors of Pal ul Don gathered in the great throne room of the palace at A Lur upon the steps of the lofty pyramid, and placing Ja don at the apex, proclaimed him king. Upon one side of the old chieftain stood Tarzan of the Apes, and upon the other Korak the Killer, worthy son of the mighty ape man. And when the brief ceremony was over, and the warriors with upraised clubs had sworn fealty to their new leader, Ja don dispatched a trusted company to fetch O lo a and Pan at lee and the women of his own household from Ja lur. And when the warriors discussed the future of Pal ul Don, and the question arose as to the administration of the temples and the fate of the priests, who practically without exception had been disloyal to the government of the king, seeking always only their own power and comfort and aggrandizement, and then it was that Ja don turned to Tarzan. "Let the Dor ul Otho transmit to his people the wishes of his father," he said. "Your problem is a simple one," said the ape man, "if you but wish to do that which shall be pleasing in the eyes of God. Your priests, to increase their power, have taught you that Jad ben Otho is a cruel god, that his eyes love to dwell upon blood and upon suffering. But the falsity of their teachings has been demonstrated to you today in the utter defeat of the priesthood. Take then the temples from the men and give them instead to the women, that they may be administered in kindness and charity and love. Wash the blood from your eastern altar and drain forever the water from the western. Once I gave Lu don the opportunity to do these things, but he ignored my commands, and again is the corridor of sacrifice filled with its victims. Liberate these from every temple in Pal ul Don. Bring offerings of such gifts as your people like, and place them upon the altars of your god. And there he will bless them, and the priestesses of Jad ben Otho can distribute them among those who need them most." As he ceased speaking, a murmur of evident approval ran through the throng. Long had they been weary of the avarice and cruelty of the priests, and now that authority had come from a high source with a feasible plan for ridding themselves of the old religious order without necessitating any change in the faith of the people, they welcomed it. "And the priests," cried one, "we shall put them to death upon their own altars, if it pleases the Dor ul Otho to give the word." "No," cried Tarzan, "let no more blood be spilled. Give them their freedom and the right to take up such occupations as they choose." That night a great feast was spread in the Pal don so, and for the first time in the history of ancient Pal ul Don black warriors sat in peace and friendship with white. And a pact was sealed between Ja don and Om at that would ever make his tribe and the Ho don allies and friends. It was here that Tarzan learned the cause of Ta den's failure to attack at the stipulated time. A messenger had come from Ja don carrying instructions to delay the attack until noon, nor had they discovered until almost too late that the messenger was a disguised priest of Lu don. And they had put him to death and scaled the walls and come to the inner temple court with not a moment to spare. The following day O lo a and Pan at lee and the women of Ja don's family arrived at the palace of A Lur, and in the great throne room Ta den and O lo a were wed, and Om at and Pan at lee. For a week Tarzan and Jane and Korak remained the guests of Ja don, as did Om at and his black warriors, and then the ape man announced that he would depart from Pal ul Don. Hazy in the minds of their hosts was the location of heaven, and equally so the means by which the gods traveled between their celestial homes and the haunts of men, and so no questionings arose when it was found that the Dor ul Otho with his mate and son would travel overland across the mountains and out of Pal ul Don toward the north. They went by way of the Kor ul JA, accompanied by the warriors of that tribe and a great contingent of Ho don warriors under Ta den. The king and many warriors and a multitude of people accompanied them beyond the limits of A Lur, and after they had bid them good bye and Tarzan had invoked the blessings of God upon them, the three Europeans saw their simple, loyal friends prostrate in the dust behind them until the cavalcade had wound out of the city and disappeared among the trees of the nearby forest. They rested for a day among the Kor ul JA while Jane investigated the ancient caves of these strange people, and then they moved on, avoiding the rugged shoulder of Pastur ul Ved and winding down the opposite slope toward the great morass. They moved in comfort and in safety, surrounded by their escort of Ho don and Waz don. In the minds of many there was doubtless a question as to how the three would cross the great morass, but least of all was Tarzan worried by the problem. In the course of his life he had been confronted by many obstacles only to learn that he who will may always pass. In his mind lurked an easy solution of the passage, but it was one which depended wholly upon chance. It was the morning of the last day that, as they were breaking camp to take up the march, a deep bellow thundered from a nearby grove. The ape man smiled. The chance had come. Fittingly then would the Dor ul Otho and his mate and their son depart from the unmapped Pal ul don. He still carried the spear that Jane had made, which he had prized so highly because it was her handiwork that he had caused a search to be made for it through the temple in A lur after his release, and it had been found and brought to him. He had told her laughingly that it should have the place of honor above their hearth as the ancient flintlock of her Puritan grandsire had held a similar place of honor above the fireplace of Professor Porter, her father. At the sound of the bellowing, the Ho don warriors, some of whom had accompanied Tarzan from Ja don's camp to Ja lur, looked questioningly at the ape man, while Om at's Waz don looked for trees, since the GRYF was the one creature of Pal ul don which might not be safely encountered even by a great multitude of warriors. Its tough armored hide was impregnable to their knife thrusts, while their thrown clubs rattled from it as futilely as if hurled at the rocky shoulder of Pastur ul Ved. "Wait," said the ape man, and with his spear in hand he advanced toward the GRYF, voicing the weird cry of the Tor o don. The bellowing ceased and turned to low rumblings and presently the huge beast appeared. What followed was but a repetition of the ape man's previous experience with these huge and ferocious creatures. And so it was that Jane and Korak and Tarzan rode through the morass that hems Pal ul don upon the back of a prehistoric triceratops, while the lesser reptiles of the swamp fled, hissing in terror. Upon the opposite shore they turned and called back their farewells to Ta den and Om at, and the brave warriors they had learned to admire and respect. And then Tarzan urged their titanic mount onward toward the north, abandoning him only when he was assured that the Waz don and the Ho don had had time to reach a point of comparative safety among the craggy ravines of the foothills. Turning the beast's head again toward Pal ul don, the three dismounted, and a sharp blow upon the thick hide sent the creature lumbering majestically back in the direction of its native haunts. For a time they stood looking back upon the land they had just quit, the land of Tor o don and GRYF, of JA and JATO, of Waz don and Ho don, a primitive land of terror and sudden death and peace and beauty, a land that they all had learned to love. And then they turned once more toward the north, and with light hearts and brave hearts took up their long journey toward the land that is best of all, home. End of Chapter 25. End of Tarzan the Terrible by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com